Yo, I'm DJP Coaching, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to EQ correctly. There's a few things that people do, myself included, and we make mistakes in EQing, or we don't understand some of the fundamentals of the concepts and why we do what we do. So I just want to clear up some of these things that I've struggled with and things that I've had to learn over time. So the first thing is you can't polish a turd. So you need to make sure that you start with good samples when you start. If you start with something that's, if you start with a kick drum and, you've got one kick drum and you don't like the high end of it, right? You're trying to take out all these high end frequencies that you don't want. And in the end, you end up with a kick drum that sounds kind of whack because you've put so much processing on it. It's still a crap kick drum and it's going to sound like it did originally, but like you've tried to cover up all the mistakes. You're better off getting 2 or 3 good sample kick drums, maybe one that you really like the high end of, one that you like the low end of, and then one that you like the punch of, and then isolating them frequencies and doing it like that. But I'll get onto that later on. So I'm going to start with just a basic EQ on my kick, on my drum rack here. And I just want to show you sort of what we're looking for here. So I'm going to be looking for the fundamental frequencies and the harmonics. So let me just solo the kick. So you've got 3 kicks here, and they're all slightly different. This one you can see is the punchy kick. This one is the sort of the boominess of the kick, and this is the punchy kick. I think there's a blend of the two, but let's just listen to it here and we'll be able to see sort of the fundamental frequency of the kick and the frequencies that are overlaid of that. So you can probably tell the main punch of the kick is happening around here, around 50-30 hertz, about 50-60 hertz, and then all the harmonics are going down here. You can see they slowly tail off as it goes along, and most of the body's coming from around this sort of low mid sub sort of area. So that's the gist of it. You can look in more detail if I soloed, let's say, this drum, and we have a look at this one. You can see the frequencies a little clearer. But again, it's around that sort of area, and you can tell where the punch is because it's usually the loudest frequency, or the tallest on the EQ. Okay, so moving on from that, we've got reductive EQ, so don't add anything. Not all the time, obviously. Sometimes if you're doing like a specific sound, maybe a bit of Foley or something, sometimes I can really isolate a certain frequency and then just turn it up. But I wouldn't try to boost. Right, so say maybe I want to take out some of this high end, right? Instead of it being that way, let's say, all right, I want to add a boost to the sub, right, the low end. So some people would be like, all right, I want to add a boost here, and you think, yeah, that sounds better, right? But then you listen in the mix, and in the mix, that's not going to sound how you want it to. It's going to be clashing with other things, and it's just going to mess it all up. I'll try and give you an example so you can hear the gist. And with it off, see, that punch is still there, but it sometimes you can add too much, and instead of thinking what can I add, think instead what can I take away. So in this case, I'll probably take away something around the high end maybe, but I've pretty much done all the work on this, but I'm just being extra obvious. Alright, and then I'll add a boost around here. We'll see the difference in what we're trying to get here. So probably something like this, and this is what it sounds like normally. Then with the high end taken out, it takes a little bit more out of that high end frequencies, but then if I add some in the bass, it might sound better to the untrained ear, but knowing from experience of playing it on rigs or playing it on sound systems and things like that, or different speaker systems, or just in a car, you can tell the difference is night and day. You can feel a lot more of it, and you can't hear it as much as you'd like. You hear it a lot more, or you feel it, sorry, a lot more. And it does mess up the sub, it messes up the bass. The low end of the track ends up being sort of in a bit of a mess. So always try and remove things as opposed to adding things. And even though it may sound great when you soloed it and you're just listening to the drums, and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds miles better, and that sounds more dimmer and less bright. So you want that in, right? And they want to keep that in. But no, you got to think about what you need to take away. You also have to think about the overall mix, but I'll come on to that later. So the next tip is, yeah, again, try not to EQ in solo, because you need to hear the overall mix. I used to do it a lot. I know a lot of people do. They'll start a new project, they'll be working on their drums, and they'll be working for hours and hours on these drums, EQing their kick and making sure everything sounds perfect. And then the second you start putting other things with it, you realize you've mixed it all wrong, because the track requires something different to what you've mixed it for. You've mixed it based on your idea of what the track's going to be, and then when it turns out differently, it's not what you expected and it doesn't sound right in the mix. So yeah, I'd always very quickly listen out for something that I don't like the sound of, and then I'll go into the mix, solo it, and take out whatever the bit that I was thinking of, and then jump straight back into the mix, so that I don't spend too much time worrying about it and messing it up when I could just lose track of what I'm trying to achieve from it in the whole grand scheme of things. Okay, and the next tip is cutting off extreme frequencies. So this is something I'd usually do on a master, or sometimes on my hi-hats and stuff like that. I'll just show you on the master just to give you a good idea. Let me just... Okay, so let's say we're doing it on the master, right? And you got your frequencies doing their thing. You can tell already there's a little bit of a scoop off there. I'll get this EQ up. You can see what I've done there basically. Also apologies for background noise. Yeah, so anything under about 20 hertz don't need. It's below the frequencies that we can hear as human beings, and under that it's only stuff that you can feel. But again, in a live sense, on a rig or on a sound system, them frequencies, or I mean, on a sound system you're going to hear it more, but it's still going to mess up with your sub frequencies, and it's just not necessary. And it'll also make a massive difference in the cleanness of your overall mix and your overall master once you're done. And then another one on the high end I've got on this at about 16k. Our hearing goes from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And I think after about 17k, 18k, it's just really tinny, sort of too high, almost like clashy. It doesn't sound nice, and you know, most of the time you're going to want to get rid of that, because in a live sense, you know, you're out at a gig, there's some really high-end frequencies, it's going to sound way worse on a rig than it's going to sound in your room, on your speakers, whatever you're using. So yeah, that covers the extremes. Sometimes I do it on hi-hats as well, just as a little reference here. I'll move this over to my cymbals like that, and we'll have just a quick listen to them. Like if I just cut up everything up to about 18, 16k, somewhere around there, all you can hear here is and like everything above that is really, you can hear it tinny. It sounds too abrasive is the word. So usually in a case like this, if I was EQing my hi-hats, I'd probably do something like that. I cut off around there, and then I bring everything up to about maybe there, because you don't need any of this low-end content. And then we'll try it without. Obviously, sometimes you do want to keep them low-end frequencies in your hi-hats, sort of mid-rangey area, because it does add a nice little bit of tonality, a bit of character, a bit of some mids, you know, especially with a low-pitched sort of hi-hat. You want it more of a percussive element, as opposed to a cymbal. But like you can hear here, there's a lot of, there's even low-end content there, like all the way to the sub frequencies. There's content, and if you can help reduce that, that's the best. So something around there would be my ideal. Maybe a little bit more high-end, about there. That's what I'd usually go for in a case of this track. And the next tip is something that it's hard to really explain, but it's the small changes, the small bits of EQ differences. So for example, like we've just done on there, cutting out that low end frequency in the hi-hats, you don't need any of that. And if you did that on a bunch of different instruments that don't need them frequencies, you end up with a massive change overall. So something to remember is small changes make massive differences. So tiny little incremental changes throughout the mix will make the overall mix sound miles better, way more professional. I'd say out of 10, you could probably get 3 or 2 points added on just from good EQ. So if you could have all the good compression, your good stereo width, you know, your bass is only mono, all of that good stuff, but then you've not EQ'd correctly and you've got loads of sub frequencies in your hi-hats, you've got sub frequencies in your snares, you've got all that useless information that's being added into the mix, and it's making the sub and the bass, the kick and the basses and the sub, it's adding extra sub harmonics to that, and it's going to make them sound less clean, more muddy. And if you can reduce that as you're going along with quick little bits of EQ like that, it's going to make the overall mix and the master sound so much better. And finally, the last tip today is the 𝙀𝙀-Munson curve. So I'll put it on the screen now so you can see it. The 𝙀𝙀-Munson curve is basically the frequency response of our ears. So based on different frequencies, which frequencies are perceived loudness. So it's how we hear sound. It's everything from the reflections on our face to the vibrations in our body. Obviously for every person it's slightly different, but the overall gist is the same. Around 1k is quite a big boost, just because, you know, babies crying, we've naturally adapted to hear them frequencies louder because they're more important to us as humans. So it's always good to keep that in mind. There's also a good VST you can use. It's a free VST called Smile. If you type in Smile 𝙀𝙀-Munson, It might be discontinued now, but it's basically you get one knob or two, and you get to basically attenuate it, and it adds the 𝙀𝙀𝙧𝙀𝙀 curve. So I do that on maybe the final stage of my mix, just to add a little bit more of that good sort of frequency sort of manipulation to clean it up, make it sound even better. I wouldn't use it crazily. I wouldn't put it like all the way up on some instrument or something like that, but I'd definitely put it on the master, and just a tiny bit, maybe 1 or 2 points out of 10, just to sort of add more, just shape the tone, or shape the overall sound in a way that helps us and our natural hearing processes. There'll be a few links down below to websites that are useful to you, things that I've learned from, and the 𝙀𝙀𝙧𝙀𝙀 curve will also be included down below. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm still doing one-to-one teaching based on music production and DJing. I can also cover important elements of branding and your social media presence. Lessons start at £15 per hour, followed by 20. We can do Zoom. I'm available whenever it suits you. Also, anything like this, I've got a few things on my Patreon that I'm building up right now. There's going to be a lot of content on there. So if you are interested in that, I think the first tier starts at £4, and it gives you access to a bunch of music. It gives you access to a bunch of useful things that you can just quickly drag into your Ableton project and start playing around with. So again, I hope you really enjoyed, and I hope to see you soon in the next video. Adios.